to our ongoing Talbot Express activities. Now, today we're going to start to have a look at the gear linkages. The vehicle here, 2 litre petrol version, suffers the same problem as so many of them do, with very, how can we describe it, sloppy gear changes as a result of the conversion from left to right hand drive many years ago. So many variables in the gear linkage that over time and where we just see an ever increasing decline in the accuracy of the gear change. So we're going to do this in stages, one little bit at a time. So this topic will form a series of little videos over the next couple of weeks. So let's see where we are to start with. Right, now, good starting point for the gear linkage is to make sure that the engine and gearbox are sitting in the right position. Now, over the past while, with various other pieces of work, as it happens, the 3 engine mounts, the 2 engine mounts, left hand mount, right hand engine mount, and indeed the gearbox mount down in the back of the gearbox there, they have all been replaced. So consequently, the engine and gearbox are sitting in as close to the original position that the manufacturer intended as possible. Now, let's then have a look at the components of the gear linkage overall. So, working from the gearbox back, we have got the shoulder through which the gearbox selector shaft comes out of the gearbox. We have got the actual selector mechanism, okay, which is then in turn attached back to the gear lever shaft by way of the gear linkage bars. Now, ultimately, every one of these plays a part in the gear selection, and obviously any wear or inaccuracy in any one of those components will multiply through the gear selector process right back to the gear lever, and consequently the smacking of your knuckles off the dashboard when you're trying to get into first. Now, we're going to approach this in a sense from the simplest starting position forward, and that's actually going to be with the gear stick bushings. Okay, so for the purposes of simplicity and ease, I've just taken the gear stick out, and I'll show you how that goes back in again in a moment when we're reassembling, but it's just attached onto the bracket on the floor of the cab by way of 2 nuts there. But anyway, the gear stick bushes, these are the items in question. Now, this is the old original one, and again I'll show you the location as we reassemble, but essentially they sit like so, either side of the gear shaft, and there's a shoulder bolt passes through them, and you're to clamp them in place around the bracket on the gear stick selector bar. Now, over time they're quite soft, and you'll see hopefully that there's quite a bit of play develops in there, and as we know, play equals sloppy change. Then the new bushes, nice shiny and fresh, when we have them back in place, they will actually sit, like so, either side of the gear shift whenever we have it back in place, the gear stick once we have it back in place. So let's just pop the gear stick back in, and then we will reassemble. Okay, so we'll pop the gear stick back on. Very straightforward, and the reverse procedure obviously takes it out. Obviously make sure the gear stick's pointing in the right direction, and we'll drop it down through the aperture, and then all we do is we have 2 little bolts, one top, one bottom, So we'll get those in place. And they'll respond to a 10mm socket. So in they go, nice and firmly. Just takes a moment, and it'll tighten down. As with all these things, enough is enough. You don't need to go overboard. Okay, all in place, and gear goes back on. Which is always the most awkward part of these operations. Get her over on, tuck it in, round the rim, and hi presto, gear stick back in place. And as I say, taking it out is the reverse. Of course, remembering that we have to disconnect it from the gear lever shaft underneath. But that's what we're going to look at now, and reinstall the new gear stick bushings. Okay, so back underneath, and we'll just have a quick look at the other components of the gear linkage, from the bit that we started up above from the engine bay. So obviously from here you can see the gear link rods, and they attach to the gear shift lever here, and actually you'll note there that the gear lever actually goes into a bush there. Now that component can be replaced, and probably is worth doing, in terms of the overall efficiency, but actually finding that is becoming increasingly difficult. So anyway, so linkage, come out of the selector mechanism, comes through that bush along the gear stick connecting rod, and then back to the bit that we're actually interested in today, which is here, where our gear stick attaches on via the bushings. Okay, so I'm going to set the camera up here out of my hand, and then I'll show you how to change those little bushings. Okay, so obviously we've disconnected the gear stick, which is up there, from the gear selector shaft running across the car. Again, this was the component that was introduced, or one of them, whenever the car changed from being left to right-hand drive. But nonetheless, disconnect that. It's a shoulder bolt, which we'll see in a minute when it goes back in, and then sitting inside that shaft you have the old bushings. So we take those out. We'll give the inside of them there just a wee clean off. I will have them out just to get a nice even feel and fix for the new ones. And then new bushings, one popped in one side, one popped in the other. Now at that point then we want to try and reposition gear stick, which needs to turn there. Just give me a second. Now, in reinstalling the new bushings, the shoulders on the new bushings are thicker than the old ones that have come out. Now what that has meant is over the years this has been clamped up, and whenever we put the new bushings in, the space between the bracket here is not sufficient to allow the gear stick back in. So what I've done is just rigged up a little lever, for want of a better word, and I'm just using the nut and bolt further to widen the gap in the bracket a little bit, just to allow the gear stick to slide back in comfortably. Right, so we have the bushings in place, and we have the gear stick now back within the bracket. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is to line the holes up and get it bolted back together. So there we go. Two nice new bushings in place, nice and firmly clamped back together, and that has removed any movement whatsoever at that point of the linkage. So let's see what happens now with the actual gear change. Okay, so as I said before, prior to changing those bushings, by the way, you'll see there's other works going on inside the cab at the minute, but let's not worry about that. Yeah, so prior to changing the bushes, going into first gear in particular, a classic problem, smacking off the dashboard. So with those bushings changed, and only those bushings changed, look at that. We're stopping well clear of the dashboard, and that's actually a firm stop. Absolutely excellent, and obviously it'll run through the rest of the gears without any issue whatsoever. So on the basis of that little piece of work, changing those bushes on their own is going to make a significant difference to the overall gear change. Now, as I said, we know we've got the engine set in the right location because the engine mounts have been changed, and I am going to continue and change the linkages and the shoulder in the gearbox. And again, whenever we do that, we'll have another little update video just to see what happens there. But once again, as always, if this has been of interest, like, subscribe, pass it on, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.